This is the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. It's Tuesday, March 18th, 2025, and it is 5 p.m. And our first order of business is a call to order by roll call. Mary Hartman,
Here.
Mike Lawson,
Here.
Rich Feely, on mute.
Here. Sorry.
Thanks, Rich. Linda Escobedo,
Present.
Megan Zamuto as our acting town manager,
Present.
and Keith Bergman present. All right, so 6 of us are here. Welcome all to this meeting. We've got a full agenda. I know that Mary has a hard stop of 6 p.m. So, and I see that actually I'm not anticipating that we'll need to take any votes tonight, apart from the very next one, which is approval of meeting minutes. I had circulated a set for our February 11th meeting, and I wonder if there's a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Linda, second by Rich. Discussion. Let's do a roll call vote on that motion to approve. Mary?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Aye.
Linda?
Aye.
Megan will be abstain.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Keith, aye. So that passes by 5 in favor, none opposed, 1 abstention. Thank you. Our next order of business is a meeting with the Massachusetts Housing Partnership to continue our discussion about the technical assistance that they're providing the trust this year. And tonight we are meeting with MHP Senior Real Estate Development Officer Karsten Snow Eichelberg. So welcome, Karsten, for this meeting. And at our previous meetings, we had met with MHP's Shelley Goring, and she will be joining us at some point during the meeting. And we have established an ad hoc committee of 5 of us, 5 members of this board, plus Stephanie from the Housing Authority, and Julie from the Concord Housing Development Corporation. And we'll be meeting off cycle from trust meetings. The ad hoc committee met on the 10th of March, and we'll be meeting again on March 24th to sort of try to move our goal setting process along. But one of the things that we wanted to accomplish tonight was to hear from Karsten about housing development economics and finance. That I was able to watch the first module of the 3-part series that MHP is offering this month for all boards in Massachusetts. And there was a good deal of talk about how the development process works, which was very helpful, and we'll be happy to have you walk us through your perspective, Karsten, on what we should know. We, as a funding agency for housing projects, help us understand the bigger picture of how funding housing works, where we fit in, and what things that we ought to be paying attention to when we're looking at how our money should be spent. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for having me here tonight. I really enjoyed doing these presentations for local boards and committees. I usually get some really great questions and discussions, so hopefully that will also be the case tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I did prepare some slides. And let me put this on presentation. Works. Okay. Oh,
Are you able to share?
Yes, but first
Okay.
I'm going to, sometimes with PowerPoint, it gets a little wonky. All right, so now if I,
There it is.
let's make sure that it shows up. All right.
We're now seeing your notes view.
Yep, let me swap the screen and then, okay. All right, so now you should see the full-size presentation. Is that correct? Great.
Yes. Thank you.
So I know that you have already worked with Shelley at least a few times, and I'm sure that several of you, as Keith mentioned, have been to MHP trainings before. So in the interest of time and getting to the good stuff, I'm going to kind of skip the behind the scenes of MHP and what we do. But if you have any questions about us, please let me know. My role specifically, as Keith said, is I am a senior real estate development officer on the community assistance team with Shelley. And the bulk of the focus of my work is helping municipalities and also housing authorities evaluate the potential for development on vacant land, as well as in the case of housing authorities, some redevelopment. And so I have a background in working for development at a housing authority. And before that, I was actually at MHP in a different role. So I've been fortunate enough to come back to MHP to work. And so when Shelley mentioned that the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust was receiving a grant under her work for technical assistance for your work, she asked if I would come and talk through the economics of developing affordable housing, what are the impacts on cost, and put it into a lens as it relates to you and your work and how you are looking to fund projects in the future. So I'm not 100% sure of everybody's background on this committee. I'm sure it varies in terms of what you know or you don't already know. So some of this, for some of you, may be new, some of it may not be. And I think what I would like is if you could hold questions, at least partway through, just to let me get through some of it. But I'm sure there will be questions, and I'm going to try to leave some time at the end. So with that, we're going to talk about putting together financing affordable housing in Massachusetts, which, as you can imagine, is incredibly simple and easy. So first, when we talk about financing affordable housing versus conventional residential real estate development, I'm not saying it's easy to necessarily do conventional, but I would say it's certainly easier than affordable. So the ultimate goal of a conventional commercial or residential real estate development is a return on your investment. Generally, it's financed with equity versus the owner's funds, or if they can raise some additional equity, and then as much debt from a loan as possible. You pay that debt from project rents, and then that remaining cash flow goes back to whoever is supposed to make a profit. So certainly simpler on paper, I guess we'll put it that way. However, when we talk about financing affordable residential real estate development, the goal is not just a return on investment, although for some developers, that's obviously the case, but the ultimate goal is that eligible residents are paying no more than 30% of their income towards rent, which is calculated in a variety of ways, and I will get to that in a minute. And what this means is that your funding sources not only have to cover those development costs, but you also have to ensure that you can adequately operate the property, knowing that you have these restricted and lower rents. And so that's where you get these multiple sources to make sure that the project is going to work. I have seen anywhere from 5 to 15 sources in a quote typical deal. And as I'll say again later in the presentation, there is no such thing as a typical real estate deal. And a lot of this is because of all of the regulations and laws and statutes that govern the development of affordable housing finance. You have higher soft costs. You often have to get additional attorneys. You have to have other engineers, typically other consultants. And on average, and this is quite a high level figure, but a new unit of affordable housing in Massachusetts can cost anywhere between $500,000 or $600,000 per unit. In some cases, it's more, it's commonly more, and unfortunately, it's going up for a variety of factors. So where does the money come from to do these developments? Well, you have to think about first the key players in Massachusetts who are involved in affordable housing development. First, the federal level, who grants mainly low-income housing tax credits, as it is applicable to development, but there's other available grants and federal money. At the state level, we have our Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, EOHLC, formerly known as DHCD. You have quasi-public agencies like Mass Housing, MHP, which are also quasi-mass development. And unfortunately, I realized I left CDAC off this list, but Community Economic Development Assistance Corporation is another quasi-public agency. At the local level, the key players and stakeholders, you have planning and zoning departments, community preservation committees, housing trusts like yourself, other oversight committees. The local government authorities and local housing authorities are a key player and resource as well. And finally, on the developer side, there are for-profit or nonprofit developers, and the development teams would include the development sponsor, the architect, the contractor, and other consultants as needed.
Yeah.
There are a huge variety of what we call affordable housing subsidy sources, which is just a way of saying this is how we pay for the housing to get built. So as I mentioned, at the federal level, you have the federal LIHTC, you have a program called Home Funds, you have the Community Development Block Grant, which are distributed according to different formulas to different areas to then go down at the local level toward projects. The state of Massachusetts also has its own state tax credit program, as well as a state affordable housing trust fund, and then competitive state bond funds for a wide variety of special priorities, including transit-oriented development, housing innovation funds, and supportive housing funds, community-based housing. There are funds for public housing redevelopment. So a lot of different priorities that you can get funded at the state level. Locally, it's not often thought about, but surplus land, even though it's not money, that is an important subsidy source for a project to be able to work, as well as CPA funds, non-CPA and other trust funds, if you don't get them from CPA, and then being able to distribute those local home CDBG funds. I know there's a lot of text on this slide, but an important thing to understand is the way that subsidy resources get awarded to affordable housing projects. So at the state level, EOHLC holds funding rounds typically once a year, although the cycle has sometimes varied, and they award the federal LIHTC credits that are given to Massachusetts, as well as their own state tax credits, the state home funds, and then the state housing bond funds. There are two different kinds of low-income housing tax credits. We don't need to do a whole session on tax credits, but there's 9% and 4%, and different deals can access different credits. And the way that you are able to access these is under a competitive allocation process, and it is based on a published qualified allocation plan, or QAP. And this is the document that the state uses to identify all of their priorities, how they intend to award the credit. Depending on which projects have more priorities in them, they may score higher, and it's meant to be a guide and a roadmap to how they will distribute limited funds. Particularly in Massachusetts, we know housing is a huge need, and the state always gets more applications than there are funds. And so that's why this really important competitive scoring system is necessary. And it's also revisited every year to make sure that priorities like housing for vulnerable populations like homeless or seniors, housing in transit-oriented development areas, to make sure that they're funding the places where you get the most bang for your buck. Every year the QAP comes out, and you can find it online at HLC's website. Very briefly on the low-income housing tax credit, if you're not super familiar, it is the program that has created the most affordable housing units in the US. It is a way to get private money into an affordable development, to fund affordable development. It has requirements on the length of time that a project has to be kept affordable. And investors in tax credit projects pledge a certain dollar amount per credit, which is a total amount of equity or funding they put in a project. And in return for that, they receive tax credits to decrease their tax liability for a period of 10 years. There are minimum affordability levels, and so in a tax credit project, generally speaking, you won't have anything above 60% of area median income. You can have units above that, but they will not generate tax credits, so it can be tough to make that work. And there are a lot of annual reporting and certification requirements from the IRS required for this program. When we talk about affordable rents, I think a lot of things get thrown around. I hear, people kind of negatively talking about affordable. There's also capital A affordable versus what we say little a affordable. So generally, I assume that everyone on this call lives in a little a affordable home and that you can afford your home, so it's affordable to you. Capital A affordable would indicate a rent or homeownership price that is restricted to people with a certain income, and the rent is calculated a certain way based on the program. And so there's generally two ways to do that. Either a percentage of actual income, and that's the case for mobile vouchers or public housing programs, in which tenants simply pay no more than 30% of their actual income, and that's how that's calculated. And the rest of the amount that is needed to operate that unit is paid for by a federal or state subsidy up to a certain amount. On the other hand, programs that have maximum rent limits, such as low-income housing tax credit projects, have what we call a percentage of theoretical income. So these are calculated at what would approximately be 30% of the monthly income for a family of certain size at a certain percentage. And so that's where you get these important calculations that come from HUD every year about area median income and fair market rents. And so tenants need to show that their incomes qualify depending on the area median income. And depending on where they fall or where they qualify or shifts in their income, they could be paying slightly more than 30% of their income. However, unlike the percentage of actual, if their incomes go up, their rents wouldn't go up. That is just an income restricted unit. So that's sort of the difference in programs. And as you're looking at applications that come in for funding, helping to understand how projects are funded and what affordable means. Why don't I do a quick pause there? Does anyone have any questions? Because I know sometimes it can be hard to remember questions.
Is there any ownership opportunity in any of these programs that is income restricted home ownership?
Unfortunately, right now, there is not really any subsidy for homeownership. So it can be really hard to make those projects work. There are calculations out there to show you what an affordable sales price would be. So if there is a developer who has enough construction equity to build a homeownership project that can then be sold at income restricted levels, you can do it. But in terms of additional subsidy from the state, the only homeownership program right now is called Commonwealth Builders, if anyone's familiar with it. And it is a very specific homeownership subsidy targeted toward gateway cities in Massachusetts with a really short affordability restriction period with the goal of building wealth long-term in those communities. So allowing the people that purchase them to get equity from that sale. So we know homeownership is an issue. Obviously, median sales prices are off the charts in Massachusetts, but right now the state is just not funding it.
Stephanie, did you have your hand up? Can't hear you.
You did, Stephanie.
I'm sorry. No, I don't have my hand up. I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I had a question about to follow up Rich's question about home ownership. Concord is facing or has a once in a generation opportunity with the reuse of MCI Concord. Since the prison is closed and DCAM is actively involved in planning for its future, as is the town of Concord, 51 acres plus 12 adjacent so I'm wondering is there any precedent for a project, a big project that the state is undertaking or sponsoring to get added to get treated as though we were eligible for gateway cities funding? That's my question.
Not right now. I think they're certainly evaluating the success of the Commonwealth Builders, and a lot of communities and developers are interested. So there's definitely talk about it, but I haven't heard anything specific yet. But you know, in the case of a really large site like MCI Concord, there's also a potential for a master planning approach and a developer that might be able to, through their equity raises and through their financing, do homeownership units in addition to rental. And so that's where we've seen it as well too, is sort of a combined multi-phase approach.
Thank you. That's helpful strategic advice for us. Thanks. Other questions before we have Carson continue?
I have a question.
Mary?
Yeah, I have a
Mary?
question. So Karsten, you mentioned the different sources of funding, and the Affordable Housing Trust was one among many. As you know, we're an affordable housing trust. So
Yes.
who actually puts this all together? I mean, you know, we have money, but who puts all this together to make these developments work within?
The development team. So depending on when a developer is pursuing a development, they will assess, and I'll get into this a little bit later of how
Okay.
it's put together. So I might answer your question in a little bit, but
Okay.
the driver of all of this is going to be a developer, essentially, depending on where it comes from. But yeah.
So the town would issue an RFP, or the owner of the land, and then the developer would have to put this all together.
It was, if you, so there, you know, if you had land, it would go
Yes.
through an RFP process where you could have
Okay.
parameters for what you'd be looking for.
Got
And
it.
it would be the responsibility of the developer to take a look at what sort of affordability you're looking for, what programs are out there they'd be eligible for, and run all those numbers and see what would work. On the other side, if you're looking at your funding, then you would be putting out NOFAs, Notice of Funding Availability. And again, developers would be looking at this as part of their what's called a stack. So if you're looking at all of those things stacked on top of each other to make the project work, the local affordable housing trust would be one of those. And so they would be assuming they're going to be applying for tax credits. They're going to be applying for other state funds. They'll go to you for your local funds. And so they're the ones driving and seeking out this funding and making sure that they're meeting all the requirements.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else before I keep going on the subsidy?
Only to ask that you make these available to Keith so that we can share them if we can.
Absolutely. Yes, I can do that. Okay, so when we also talk about subsidy, you know, obviously in a tax credit development, you have just an income restriction. You know what you're getting for rent for each unit. Another way that units are made affordable is with vouchers. And so you can have a mobile voucher. You've probably all heard of the Section 8 program, in which an eligible household is given a voucher that can cover up to a certain amount of rent. And they will pay no more than 30% of their income, and they get a subsidy for the rest. There are also programs at both the federal and state level in which you can project-base a voucher. And that sounds complicated, but essentially all it means is you tie a voucher to a unit. So instead of moving with the household, it stays with that unit to keep the unit affordable, but also generate enough money to keep it operating. At the federal level, as I said, you have Section 8. It's also sometimes called housing choice vouchers. There's VASH vouchers specifically for veterans. And then there's a public housing program that is specific to redeveloping public housing. Massachusetts also has their own state vouchers as well. So in a lot of development projects, you may see people coming in underwriting the project by including vouchers as a subsidy source. And so this is what to look for as to how they're using those vouchers. Okay. So similar to your question, Mary. So if you have a developer who is interested in doing an affordable housing project, and if they already have a site in mind, they have to first apply in several different funding rounds for both municipal funds and state funds. After they have put their project together, they have an idea of what it would look like. Generally speaking, in Massachusetts, you need that city or town commitment before you can apply for state funds. And I'll talk again about this later, but the more that you can show a municipality is behind a project, and especially through the inclusion of land and or funding, the more likely it is your project will be successful at the state level. As I mentioned, the applications that come in for state funding almost, I'm not gonna say almost, they always outnumber what we have in resources. And so most developers expect to go through probably at least 2 funding cycles before they're actually funded. But these, they have conversations with people at the state level, people know that they're coming in, but they kind of work that into their timing of their development. And then once you know that you have your local funding, your state funding, if you are doing a tax credit project, you are also looking for those financing partners, which is the lender and then the tax credit investor. So I kind of have this, it's linear, but it's also a circle because sometimes you got to go through the circle a couple times as a developer to get the project awarded and successful. Again, I have my typical in quotes. You'll see my note at the bottom. There's no such thing as a typical deal, but at a very high level, some of the numbers that we are seeing, if we're in a typical stack, first mortgage debt, so that's your long-term 30-year mortgage, anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 per unit. Tax credit equity, $200,000, maybe a little bit more per unit. Other state soft loans, so those would be those bond funds, potentially around $100,000 per unit, but I do want to note that the state has pretty specific caps on how much they will fund per project. And so they base that on the number of units. So if you're coming in with a more expensive project, but you're within a certain bracket, the state's only going to fund a certain amount of that. So there are caps so that they can, an effort to spread resources around. And that's where a lot of this wide variety of multiple sources comes in. And again, municipal soft loans or grants like trust funds, like CPA funds, other opportunities could be 50,000 to 100,000. It could be less if the community has less funds. It could be more if it's a priority. And then sometimes developers can access other grants. Federal Home Loan Bank often has grants. Sometimes foundations have grants, and this depends on the kind of project, but those are usually a very small amount.
Question.
Yes.
Aston, you mentioned earlier in your presentation as you were getting started, the average unit price to be around 500 to 600,000.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about what that number is? Is that all in? That's the sort of market price of a unit?
Yes, that is what we would call the per unit development cost. And so, and you'll see in a little bit, I'll have an example of a project and what it looks like. But just to kind of be able to compare apples to apples across the board, when you have a project and it includes your acquisition costs, so how much did it cost to get the land? You have your total construction costs. How much is it going to cost to build? How much does it cost for all of my attorneys and all the other thing? And then the example you'll see in a little bit, it's approximately 34 million for 60 units. And so that would work out to about $500,000 per unit. And so what that kind of statistic, I guess I'll say, is trying to do is take a lot of very different scenarios and very different projects and be able to kind of compare where you're at per unit, because everything is a different unit type, it's a different unit amount. It has, some have ledge, some have environmental issues, some are in a wetland, but how much are we paying approximately per unit all in to build one unit of affordable housing?
Karsten, that was a great question. I just want to follow on so I'm clear. So, but out of that 500 to 600,000, that's from all sources.
Yes, correct.
And
That is
typical,
everything that it costs
yeah,
to build.
Okay, and your typical, which was your previous slide, shows that on a typical deal, and I know there's no such thing as typical, the local contribution would be between 50 and 100.
Yes, and
Okay.
again, that also, if if you're a community with more resources, you may be able to put in a little bit more. If you're a community with less, more. But yes, that's where that number comes in. So that's that 500, 600. That's your tax credits, your permanent mortgage, your local funds. If you're putting in developer equity, that's all of that.
Thank you.
And that would include the cost of land.
Yes,
Yeah.
that would include the cost of land.
Yeah, here we're spending $500,000 to $600,000 on construction. So anyway.
Yes, yes, and the construction costs are, you know, that number that kind of gets thrown around is kind of like a Massachusetts number. If we were to kind of drill down on Eastern Massachusetts and Greater Boston, that's where you're coming up. I mean, you know, my previous life at Cambridge Housing Authority, in some cases you're up to $850 a unit. You know, it varies widely. And so again, that's why I caution in using these numbers, but it does kind of give you a picture of what it takes to get it done.
Well, in some instances, it could be the goal. Right.
Right. Okay, so as I mentioned, you know, especially from your perspective as a municipal affordable housing trust fund, leveraging as much as you can is really, really important in housing developments. And so the more that you can show you have commitments from one source, those really scarce resources are more likely to come in. So tax credits, as we know, they're a limited resource. City and state soft funds are a limited resource, but a little bit more flexibility. Theoretically, mortgage debt is not a limited resource. They'll lend you as much as you can potentially borrow. And so what we are in a situation is that you need projects to borrow as much as possible in order to maximize where we're putting those public funds. And so as you'll see in a minute, that's kind of the calculation you always start with as a developer is how much can I borrow for a mortgage for this project? And then what am I left with and what am I plugging in? And so just as again, I always like to stress this, you want to show the state, the community is committed to a project. If it's a project that has been vetted and seems to be a good one, a committed community means the project is more likely to be completed. So you don't want to be making awards from the state perspective to a community who's going to shut down a project, who's going to fight it. You want to see that there's at least some support. You're not going to always get support from everybody, as you guys know, but at least if you have that baseline. And it's also really important to note that local funding can be more flexible than state and federal programs. And so, as I mentioned, all of the state programs have a very hard funding cap. And so the ability to kind of backfill and work with your local funding is really, really important. And that's an important role that trusts play. And so going back to funding and understanding what is possible. When we talk about project feasibility, you're thinking of, you know, first of all, what constraints exist on the site. So if it's feasible, we're talking about feasibility initially from the standpoint of a site. You know, this is when you would want to understand what is the zoning. That's the first thing. It's not necessarily a hindrance. So if you talk about a constraint, it's not necessarily that it's going to stop the project, but these are things you have to consider. So if it's a situation where the zoning is not going to potentially allow what you want, it could mean a 40B path, it could mean rezoning, maybe there's a special permit. Do you have environmental resources on the site? So do you know that there's a river or wetlands or endangered box turtles or something else that is going to potentially shrink what we call developable area? Do you have any title issues, or is there an easement? Is there an electrical easement? Is there an easement to the neighbor's house that you don't know about? And so when you kind of, you know, if you're looking at a site, whether it's a municipality thinking about whether a site would be good for development or a developer considering if they want to pursue, that's where you want to kind of start first, is understanding where on the site you can develop. Once you go from there, then you want to think about how many units are possible. And this is both from a actual physical capacity standpoint, so how many units can reasonably fit on the site, but then also from a community goals and vision perspective. So probably in Concord, you're not going to put a 7-story high rise. It's probably not fitting in with the goals and the vision of Concord. Similarly,
there are only 6 stories. The 40Bs that are getting approved are only 6 stories.
Are only 6. So it's right. I mean, so it's going up. There's more. But then the other consideration is maybe you can fit a large number of smaller perhaps restricted units for seniors, but maybe the goal and the vision for the community is to really look for family housing, so housing that could serve a larger household. And in that case, your number of possible units would change because you're trying to meet this goal of funding a project for families. And so when we talk about how many units can you get, you have to factor in a lot of the things and what's important to the community and what's possible within the community. Another key from the municipal perspective is thinking about how much due diligence is needed. So as a developer, this is your project, this is happening, you're putting money into this, you need all of the due diligence possible. From the municipal standpoint, if you own land, you need to just understand on a preliminary level, what can be built. And so one of the things I always say is, you know, at the end of the day, anything is possible with enough money, but that doesn't mean it should happen. On the flip side, as I mentioned, constraints aren't necessarily deal breakers. And so, you know, a community doesn't need to be trying to spend tons and tons of money to check and see if land is feasible. But you do need to have a baseline understanding of what you're dealing with, because then if you want to go through the RFP process, you want to share that information with developers and help them get a head start on understanding the site. And here's where I would always put a plug for our technical assistance. And so that initial phase of due diligence is often tough for communities if you don't have the money to be able to put towards a site engineer or a wetland engineer. But MHP, in addition to our excellent direct trust technical assistance, is we have a municipal land technical assistance program that provides a grant fund and staff time from myself and some other staff. Laura Schufelt, from those of you who know her. And we coordinate and pay for third-party vendors to assess a site. And if we come to the conclusion that it's fairly feasible and can move forward, we'll work with you to do an RFP for a developer. So, you know, don't feel like if you do have land, you have to understand every single possible thing about it. There are options to get started and then pass it off to, you know, the people with the real money, so to speak. When it comes to funding applications and you're getting applications for housing, you will also need to understand whether or not a project is feasible. Generally speaking, if you're at the point of receiving the application, that project proposal has gone through many, many iterations and has had a lot of time and work behind it and is probably the most feasible version that it's going to be, potentially with some tweaks. But it is always helpful to do a review of that proposal. And I have seen trusts use outside housing development consultants to do reviews of housing projects, and it's been really successful and helped them to feel confident in the application that they're looking at. So project feasibility is an important consideration, but trusts don't necessarily need to be super in the weeds on project feasibility to be able to fund projects and fund successful projects. Project feasibility at the end of the day, from a development perspective, it's a balancing act. So simply put, your sources must equal your uses. If you know how much roughly a project is going to cost, you have to make sure that you get enough to pay for it. So you can see here, here's our stack of uses. This acquisition box might be smaller. If you're able to get a really good price or donated land, it might be bigger. Construction is a big part, and then all the way down. And then similarly, you have your first mortgage, you have your subsidy source, and your grants. And then once the project is built, and then also as you're calculating how you're going to make sure this thing works for the long term, is you have to make sure that your operating income is going to be greater than your expenses. So from a development perspective, making sure that your NOI is greater than what you're paying for the mortgage debt payments. Similarly, the NOI is what's going to determine how much you can pay. So this NOI, as I said, it comes back to your permanent first mortgage. So by starting with how many units you could potentially build, you understand then what your potential rent is. Then you understand how much you're potentially getting for the project. And then you say, okay, I know every year I'll have this much to pay towards a debt, and that tells me how much I can get from a loan. So this goes back to what I was talking about earlier about assembling that stack, is you're starting with how much is the total amount, the most that I can possibly borrow to then maximize other resources. And then if your NOI, for some reason, the project changes, can't support that, you might have to go back and look at increased subsidies, which can be very, very tough once they've been committed and awarded to increase that amount. So there's always a balancing act between this debt and subsidy amount, but you really want to be maximizing this debt from a development perspective. Similarly, you have restrictions on things like affordability. So depending on the state subsidy source that you're getting or the federal tax credits, you might have a maximum potential amount that you can charge for rent, which is then going to impact how much you're getting in rent, which then impacts how much you're making on the project. Again, if you also have a really complicated program where you're doing a lot of income certifications every year, your administrative costs might go up, which means your expenses go up because you got to pay for these every year and your operating income comes down. So development projects are always doing this. And what you start off with in the beginning that you're thinking about and proposing, it usually shifts as the environment changes and as you get more funding. But just to kind of give you a sense of where developers are coming from and juggling and proposing projects, it's always a seesaw. And paying for resident services. So I always mention that too, that there's requirements that will affect your ultimate costs, which then come back to how much you can afford. This is a little old, this chart, but it's something that we had calculated a few years ago at MHP, and I think is always helpful just to have a visual when you're talking about different levels of affordability. So starting from extremely low income and low income at around that 30% of area median income, all the way up to 120%, which is also called workforce, sometimes mass housing level. So you can see that in order to make that rent affordable to that household in that income bracket, the amount of equity and subsidy that you need to get there is significant. And so it's always a balancing act too, because we know we have to provide these units that are affordable to these households that we know are rent burdened and cost burdened. But at the same time, we have to make sure that the project can operate, that the project is going well, and that it can get the resources. And so if at any time local funding sources can help to fill that gap and keep the lower affordability, for instance, this is always a benefit. Okay, so why don't I pause there? I do have an example that I won't spend too much time on, but I thought it would be helpful just to kind of see all this in practice. But let me pause and do a little questions before I dive into numbers.
Yeah, and I just want to offer that we probably have 5 more minutes to devote to this, and then
Okay.
we've got some other folks who are waiting to see us as well. And just a reminder for our discussion on goal setting, the ad hoc committee will be meeting next Monday, March 24th at 11 a.m. And I think we'll have to we'll have to continue that part of the discussion then. So please show us your example, Karsten. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Keith, can I just ask
Yeah.
if we can get these slides and then send written questions that we could give to Karsten that she could either answer in writing or in another meeting? Because this is great stuff, but
Yeah, it is.
Yes,
That's a yes.
I'm happy to come back. If you want to I can kind of walk through this quickly, and then you can kind of take time and sit through it, and then I can come back and do a Q&A at another time. I'm happy to do that.
yeah, but we could give you the questions in advance.
Sure, absolutely.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so if we assume there's a developer, ABC developer, they want to build a 60-unit affordable family development. I kept from naming names. So for example, they start off, they want 60 units. Here's approximately what it looks like. It's in the Boston-Cambridge-Quincy MSA. So this is where they're getting their rent limits, and it's going to be a tax credit project. And they're also going to try really hard to include some low income, extremely low income at 30%. So their budget looks approximately like this. So you can see we're right around at that $530,000 number with everything all in. These are very general calculations based on assumptions. And so these would probably change a lot with real numbers, but this is based on our experience. And I will note that in this scenario, the developer was able to pay a very minimal acquisition cost of $100,000 for the site. So they've then done the math on how much they're going to get for rent, and they have come out with a net operating income of a little bit more than $660,000. And that translates to, and then they want to go for those 9% tax credits. So they're hoping to get about potentially $20 million in federal tax credit equity from the 9%. And that net operating income means that they can get a mortgage, a long-term permanent mortgage of a little bit less than $9 million. And when we calculate our permanent mortgage debt and our tax credits, we have about a $2 million gap that we have to fill with other sources. So where are we going to get the other sources? They were able to get some state tax credits, which is capped at $800,000 for this project. They got some additional state funds because it's in a transit-oriented development zone. And then the local trust gave $700,000, which fills the remainder of the gap that they were missing. Great news, project is successful. Oh no, now there is more extensive site work. They have figured out that they need additional environmental remediation to make the project work, and they have already had the awards committed. So as you can see, our site costs went from 3.6 million to 5.4 million, which results in a slightly higher amount of equity, but your mortgage hasn't changed because you still have the same number of units. And so now your gap is higher. Luckily, the local trust is flexible, and they are able to increase their award after the developer goes back to them because they have already been awarded tax credits and they have maxed out the ultimate amount of equity that they're going to get at the pricing, and they cannot get any more on the state cap. So the flexibility of the local funds means that this project can go forward. So the local trust gave about $400,000 more, 500. So that is just one example of how you can put together a project and have it look amazing, and you go down a path and then something seemingly small changes and it throws everything into disarray. There are a lot of other variables that could impact cost. So if you're thinking of an elevator building versus a non-elevator building, elevator buildings are significantly more expensive, but increase accessibility. And so thinking about what's important, what's a goal of the kind of developments that you're funding. One thing that a lot of times communities don't understand is if you have someone come in for a 60 unit development, and you say, well, this is fine, but I only want 40 units. It's not very simple to just simply decrease that number of units because a lot of costs will still stay the same. And so that can actually create funding gaps as well, even though the number is decreased. A lot of times, and this has happened to me, you go along and you get several different construction cost estimates, and then you get right before the final bidding or pricing, and construction going up. This happened a lot during COVID because of supplies, and now we all know tariffs are being put on, which could have a huge impact on construction costs. And these are just things that you can't always predict. Another thing would be insurance changes. So if you have to increase the amount of insurance from your estimate. So things that can really impact a cost, even after you do everything right and you follow your stack, there's always these cost variables that are happening, particularly for affordable housing. And finally, I wanted to wrap up with just some thoughts on considerations and best practices for trust funds. So initiating the housing activity, you can put out your NOFAs when your funding is available. You want to assess the potential applications that come in, and you want to look at them for feasibility, as we discussed, and also alignment with your municipal goals and your need, and then any required reporting as dictated by your source. The area that you want to be cautious is the more that a municipality is involved in a project, as opposed to just putting out a RFP with some open potentials for design, it triggers some procurement. And so you just want to be cautious about towing that line between municipal providing the land versus a developer. And finally, your role in distributing funds. So guiding the distribution of funds by establishing measured goals. You want to minimize your administrative burden, so you don't necessarily need to be at every single construction meeting if you've awarded a project, but you want to make sure that reporting is happening and that you understand where those funds are going. And finally, don't be afraid to utilize resources and outside expertise to help you confirm funding decisions and applications. And I will leave it there. I think that might have been less than 5 minutes, but if there's any other questions, I
Well,
have a few minutes.
that was time very well spent. Time is money, and we are about the money here, as well as about the housing, whether it's done with our funds or whether it's done through developers and regulatory things the town meeting passes. So thanks so much. That what a great introduction to Concord, Karsten. Thanks so much. We will have you back, definitely. We're going to pick our before we leave, we'll be picking our next meeting time, but we'll look forward to having you back again to continue this discussion. So
great, and I will share the slides so that everyone can have them.
That's great. Thanks very much. I'm going to move now to the next agenda item, which is the New England Deaconess Association Continuing Care Retirement Community Overlay Zoning Proposal. And we have on the call, I see Deaconess CEO Chris Sintros here, and is your attorney here?
You know, Mark Bobrowski, I believe, is on audio, and he can.
Oh, there he is. Okay.
For us if,
the name. Great.
And we also have, if it's okay, Keith, I'll also introduce Jim McGowan as our CFO, and Brett Pelletier is supporting us on the housing side.
Thanks so much. Welcome team. And I'll just do disclosure. I've been a fan of New England Deaconess for a quarter of a century, only because I was able to convince them to come to Provincetown when I was town manager there and build me a $20 million assisted living, independent living, skilled care nursing facility. But it was on land. It was on a 3-acre site that we assembled for you, and we gave you lots of money, and you took it over for us, and I'm grateful for that. And so thank you. And that was the first time 25 years ago when I visited Newbury Court to do the meetings for that deal. So welcome here, and talk to us about your proposal, Chris.
Thank you, Keith. And I'll just have to say, since you're raised Provincetown, you know, I'm particularly proud that we were part of saving that nursing home. And I think it really, I can't tell you how many people I've run into in the last 15 years that have said to me, you know, I looked at that nursing home. I can't believe you took it, you know. And it's still there today, and it's the biggest employer in the town of Provincetown, except for the town itself, year round. The nursing home particularly I'm proud of, so thank you, Keith. Again, I'm Chris Sintros. If I could introduce myself briefly, I've spent the last 30 years in senior living, about half of that time in the for-profit part of senior living, and the last half of it in the not-for-profit part of senior living. And I can't say enough how important it is to me to be here as part of New England Deaconess. I love being part of the not-for-profit part of senior living. There is a difference. And if there's one thing I could share as we start to ask Brett to, you know, put his slides up, is that we are about the service. And if there's one thing I could say about New England Deaconess, we're founded in 1889. We've served here in Concord since 1910. We've provided service to the community here in Concord for 5 generations. And what we're really about is the service. It's true, as Keith said, sometimes we build things, but at our core, at our baseline, we are not housing developers. We are not, you know, the type of organization that's going to come in, make money, maybe build a couple of affordable units and then sell it, taking a bunch of profit out. You know, we are, again, here 115 years on this site, and I'm incredibly proud of the service nature of our organization. And I can't also say enough how great it was to see Karsten's presentation, because it was almost the best presentation anybody could have given about one, how hard it is to build the housing. But then on that one slide where she had operating expenses, the resident service operating expenses, I might have guessed it to look like 15% of the bar graph or 20% of the bar graph. You know, we are the exact opposite. And so as we talk about, we're 80% service expense. And so as we talk about our hope for a CCRC overlay district, you know, we really want to keep in clear view the importance of healthy aging and the importance of services. So with that said, maybe I could ask Mark Bobrowski to walk us through the CCRCOD.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, everybody. I apologize for not having video. I'm in recovery mode in the Caribbean after rotator cuff surgery 10 days ago. The video is not particularly useful here. So this is just a quick overview of why we proposed what we proposed so that you can put the discussion later about affordable/attainable units in context. This is obviously about the purchase by the 12 acres across Ornac from Emerson Hospital that occurred last year. This is now part of NIDA's portfolio, and what they'd like to do with it is more continuing care retirement community. That's not a common thing, if you will. There's a website that the Commonwealth runs on CCRCs. I don't think there's more than 40 in the state. Some are big, some are small. Carlton Willard's relatively the most prominent one, along with Newbury Court in our area. But these are special creatures. This is not just an assisted living facility that's freestanding, that takes people in for money, and when the money runs out, they most of the time have to find another place to go. This is a place in which there's a contract between the institution, the CCRC, and the incoming tenant, in which the tenant is allowed to choose a unit, whether it's independent to start, or assisted living as old age progresses, or long-term skilled nursing care at the end of days. And the entire process here is designed to allow people to age in place. Next slide, Brett. So, as I said, age in place. This is not for profit. The law itself recognizes that a care facility of this type may have independent, assisted, and nursing home accommodations, and that there's an evolutionary movement through the facility as somebody ages. Now, those are uses that are also somewhat contained in the Concord zoning bylaw. Independent living would be equivalent to a 2 or a 3 unit townhouse. There is in the underlying district, which is residential 80,000 square feet, an allowance for a 2 unit building, but it requires a separate special permit. Oddly, in the medical professional district where Newbury Court is located, there's no allowance for assisted living. They've been there 140 years, and that is a no in the use table, assisted living. And then the last use that I pointed to a second ago, which is the long-term care facility, is an allowed use. A nursing home is, I think, the terminology, which is rather old at this point, is used, and it is a yes. So not all of the uses that we want associated with a CCRC are even allowed in the district. Thus the idea to create an overlay district that allows Newbury Court to do across the street what they've done for the better part of 100 and some years at the current location. And I'll let Chris talk more about the service components of this as we move through. But Chris, why don't you just hit the highlights here, and then I'll take it back.
Sure. I'm going to just dwell on the not-for-profit phrase first. You know, 80% of senior living and 80% of senior housing is a real estate deal. It's an investment. It's a for-profit investment. We are in the small minority of the not-for-profits. And if you look at hospitals and universities and colleges, those numbers are just about flipped. And we want to be part of keeping a strong not-for-profit CCRC model viable. And again, it's a long-term institutional commitment to a stage of life. We do about $1 million a year of charity care here at Newbury Court. We do more elsewhere in the company. So our Northampton campus does about $1 million or $1.5 million a year. We do pay about $1 million a year of taxes in this site. I think it's $910,000 we paid last year. And we do participate in other charitable activities in town. And so I know there's going to be a lot of temptation to treat us like housing folks. And, you know, I understand the reason why. But we have a lot in common with places like the hospital as well. And we want to make sure we're seen as service providers.
Next slide, Brett. And we're going to hit on this a little bit later in terms of the various service programs that are offered at a CCRC, so we can go to the slide after. All right, so I just want to get you on board with the key provisions of the zoning amendments. First of all, this is an overlay district, and it allows a use on the specific 12.1 acres that isn't allowed today. It's a use that exactly fits the proposal that will come for site plan approval if and when town meeting votes to adopt this. It's specific to this parcel. It doesn't apply to any other parcel in town. If somebody else wanted to put a CCRCOD on their property, they'd have to come to town meeting, get a 2/3 vote on their own. And I don't see that happening, but it is always possible. Next, please. The density that we're proposing here, and I'll show you a slide in a second, fits with the maximum number of units that we think we can comfortably fit on the 12.1 acres. And that number is 200. Hold your thoughts on that, because I'm going to show you a couple of slides as to why we chose that number. With 12.1 acres and 200 potential units, that's a density of about 16 units an acre. There also is a requirement, and we have discussed this extensively with Elizabeth and already met on a preliminary basis with the planning board. The planning board public hearing is on April 9th. Of 20% open space, the open space has to be not more than half wet, half dry. There are no wetlands on the 12.1 acre parcel on the north side of Ornac. Next slide. There's also a height limitation. We envision that the independent living units will be in probably a duplex arrangement, not to exceed 35 feet in height, which is the standard height limitation in a residence district. And then the height of a multi-unit building will not exceed 85 feet. I would point out that in the MP district today, on the south side of Route 2, there are two MP districts, one north, one south of Route 2. The current height limitation is 110 feet. And I'm sure that's because the hospital is 110 feet. I often come down from Harrington, from Ministerial to Harrington to Old Marlborough, and sit at that light and try to guess how tall the hospital is. And I've now got it probably right at about 110 feet. Next slide. So this is the 12.1 acres that Newbury Court has bought. It was 7 residences. There was a child care facility up there. The golf course 10th fairway is on the left-hand side of the screen. And all the houses that are on this property are derelict. Some of them are falling down. The last one was on 45 Old Marlborough to be occupied, and it stopped being occupied about 6 or 7 months ago. There's access to public water. There's no sewer, so there's a proposal here that we think will fit easily, which is a groundwater discharge permit, roughly at the corner of Old Marlborough and Ornac. Next slide. The density calculation, as I said, is based on the proposed number of units, 200, and a total upland acreage of 12.1. Math is simple. It's about 16 units per acre. Next slide. The open space is shown here just as for illustrative purposes, because we don't know where it will be. Ultimately, it will be placed by the planning board in the course of site plan approval. This is our initial pitch, but the planning board may have other ideas. However, what you see there is 20% open space, about 2.5 acres. This is a key slide for our purposes on density. Newbury Court today is 35 acres. But the upland acreage is about 18.4. There's 301 units on the property. If you divide 301 by 18.4, you get a density per upland acre of 16. So our thinking was, if you like Newbury Court, and it's been there, as I said, 130 years, you'll probably like what we do across the street, because it's going to mimic the architecture and the feel of Newbury Court. Next slide. Here's some preliminary concepts. These are just generic pictures that we picked off the internet. Those would be the independent living units in the smaller buildings there. And if you go on to the next slide, Brett, you can see that that would likely be the multi-unit building. The original proposal that we had, at least in mind, was that the townhouse homes would be on the perimeter of the property and the larger unit building would be in the center. And the property slopes from the 10th fairway all the way down to Ornac. So that building will be much lower at the foundation level than the townhouses up on the hill.
I do have to say it, Mark. We found a better picture than this because I don't particularly like this one, for the record. But keep going for illustrative purposes. For illustrative purposes,
yeah, they're placeholders, and
yeah,
we'll obviously have an architect by the time we get to site plan review. Next slide.
that's right.
All right, so I'm going to turn this back over to Chris to talk about contributions from NIDA today.
Yes, so the organization is historically run between 24 and 28 independent living, or 20 total units that we considered under our affordable program. And so there's a sliding scale policy that we've had that has an income and asset test that has worked very well over the years, and that has allowed, you know, a number of different folks to move in here. The crux of what I want to make sure I'm communicating is it's not just allowing folks who might be of different income or asset levels to move in. There's an incredible amount of service that they're exposed to and have access to. And you know, I want to make sure we don't lose that part of this in the conversation. Company-wide, and you can see this in our audit, we did 2.7 million of free care in 2023. The 2024 audit is, I guess, starting today. So you'll see the updated one when that gets completed. And you can see the charity care listed there. If we slip forward, Brett. Again, we've said this, you know, we're about the surface. We provide charity care, we pay taxes, and we have the affordable units currently. Next slide. So we look forward to working on this. I think maybe this is the chance where Brett can move over to some of his slides, but as I hope you can see already.
While he's doing that, Chris, I just want to put this into perspective.
Yep.
When we started out on this proposal, we realized we were going to have three main issues to come at us. One was obviously the design. Do we want big buildings at that corner? The second was obviously traffic. I live up the road. I understand the traffic there as well as anyone in Concord, because if you get there at the wrong time, you're in the hospital shift change. And the third is affordability. I've lived in town for 25 years, been on the planning board. I hear it every day. So we knew we were not going to be able to dodge it. In fact, we welcomed it because we think we have a unique spin on attainability, which is a more suitable word for what we're proposing than affordability. I'm a land use lawyer. I've done, between the work I've done for municipalities in my career and the work I've done on the private side in 40B, I have hundreds of 40Bs under my belt. And I've probably got 4 going right now. So I get it. It's part of my everyday life. That is an animal that we're not talking about here. This is not Trammell Crow. It's not Avalon Bay. This is an entirely different fish. And to use the standards for 40B, that is the highly regulated animal that we've all come to know and love, is not the right toolkit here. That's the point we're trying to make. So I'm going to introduce Brett Pelletier, who can give you some preliminary thinking on this point.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you very much all for having me. My name is Brett Pelletier. I'm with a firm called Harith Community Advisors. I've been a housing economist and affordable housing consultant for about 20 years now. And I'm going to blast you through some statistics and some slides that should hopefully spark a conversation about affordable and attainable housing and how it relates to the continuing care retirement community context that we're talking about. The first thing I'll say is to piggyback what Mark said, that the housing metrics and the regulatory structures that exist in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and in the United States of America are a bit like fitting a square peg into a round hole when it comes to a CCRC. Some basic statistics we'll go through. Concord, as you know, as an aging population, and statistically that percentage of the population is increasing. And as in the next slide, I'll show you a chart, as those populations increase and as that age of that population increases, household income declines substantially in the age cohorts, 65 plus, 75 plus, 85 plus. And the affordable housing infrastructure is largely predicated on wage earning heads of household, right? Income generating. Your terrific presentation from the folks at MHP earlier indicated, the standards of 25 to 30% of one's take-home income towards housing. Well, that becomes a little more problematic when you try to relate that to largely a population that their income doesn't come from wages, right? Their income comes from all sorts of other places outside of traditional W-2 wages. And furthermore, when you introduce an inclusivity of services component. And so what I really want to stress is that CCRCs provide services and housing, not just housing with an optional service. And I think Chris is right in the capital stack and the operating structure that in the slide that Karsten presented, that was somewhere in the $2,000 to $3,000 per unit per year of operating expenses, maybe $4,000. We're in a different stratosphere. We're in the $40,000 to $50,000 to $60,000 per unit per year in services. It's a totally different universe from the traditional multifamily and affordable, big A affordable housing. And so additionally, in that presentation, there's a great slide that showed all of the capital subsidies that are available, the low-income housing tax credit, CDBG funds, home funds, state and federal LIHTC, it could, CPA funds at the local level, and operating subsidies, whether that's an MRVP voucher, whether that's a Section 8 voucher, whether that's a VASH voucher, all of which contribute to the economic viability of affordable housing. None of those are available to CCRCs. There are no subsidies available in the same way that, just like there are hardly any subsidies available for sale units in the affordable housing ecosystem. That same thing is true for this CCRC. So what New England Deaconess has done is practice this concept of housing attainability and affordability for quite a number of years. Basic demographics, and you'll have these slides if you'd like them afterwards and if you want to study them more. But I want to point out a couple of things. This downward trajectory is an important consideration when we're talking about applying standards that are traditionally meant for affordable housing, multifamily housing, to seniors care-based housing. You look at the median household income currently for all households in Concord, it's about $212,000 annually, a little over $212,000 based on the 2023 Census ACS survey. As you go through the income slice, the age cohort slices, age 55 to 64, it's very similar. A slight decline of 200,000, but relatively consistent because those are peak earning years, right? Age 65 to 74, your income goes down about $60,000. Age 75 and up, you're now half of what that what that 55 to 64 level was, and you're even less than that of the median. And that puts some indications of what the HUD area metro FMR of a one-person household of about 104,000 and 119,000 for a two-person household, which is the target demographic for CCRCs, 1 and 2 person households. I would note that the average entry age of someone at New England Deaconess is 81 years old. So they are squarely in that that demographic that is income is variable and volatile. Again, not based on.
That's average age of entry, Brett.
What did I say? I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, just want to.
Yeah.
Average age of entry.
So in context, housing exists on a spectrum, right? And it goes from all the way from homelessness or folks who are unhoused all the way up through market rate, luxury home ownership opportunities and everything in between. And it needs to exist on a spectrum so that it serves all the needs of a community. And the community needs, by definition, vary by the age of the household, the size of the household, the type of these family households, of these individuals, what the income levels are, and what personal needs those might have. In our case, we're targeting an age cohort of 62 and up with an average entry age of 81. So we are already narrowing your focus a little bit. Household size, 1 and 2 person households. The income and assets, which Chris is going to talk about a little bit later, it's extremely variable. And we want to be able to be responsive to that variability in providing care. And those needs, as Chris had mentioned earlier as well, they're varied and they evolve over time. That's the model of a CCRC, right? You may come in at independent living, but you don't ever have to leave. You've got the care you need throughout your life stages that require that. Whereas in traditional multifamily housing or affordable housing, if your needs or your income changes so significantly that that facility can't support you anymore, you got to find a new place to live. And so what is important about the CCRC model is that continuation on the spectrum, right?
Right.
Yes.
I'm starting to get a time flash here from Keith.
Okay.
So Keith, tell us how many more minutes and we'll prioritize the rest.
Let's do 5 minutes. I want to try to have the meeting
fine.
end by 6:30 and we have another group to talk to. Thanks.
Sure.
I can talk fast.
So if
I
I could just maybe, Brett, super quick on this slide, highlight, as I've been learning about the town's, needs and prioritized goals. I saw the finance committee note about the town's financial position. I see the select board goal about financial planning and stability. You can see Brett's attainable housing definition, which Brett has a fair amount of experience with, and we can leverage that experience in a future date if we need to. But that last point is just incredibly important. Having been here for almost 17 years, having the flexibility to be able to support folks in the way that they need to be supported is incredibly important. Maybe advance the slide, Brett. I'll give some examples, but I'll also say, it did not work in some of our other projects where we had the conventional definitions and the conventional language. We've covered a fair amount of the talking points in the left part of this slide, but on the right part of this slide really goes back to that cost structure we were trying to highlight. Mark sort of shared with me, this is what you typically are up against in a 40B in terms of what shelter costs includes. And you look at all the services we have, and we don't have these like once or twice. We have these all the time. They're harder to deliver when it's snowing. They're harder on Christmas. They're harder when people are on vacation. But we deliver these services all the time and have consistently for generations on this site. Dining, personal emergency response, transportation, housekeeping, fitness, gym, on-site concierge, on-site nursing to respond to emergencies, maintenance daily, IT support, the I'm okay check, the outpatient therapy. We have all these services that in my career, everyone's told me, I don't want those services. But if you live in a community with folks over, 83, 85, 87, 90, 92, 95, 97, those types of services actually give life back to the years and create successful aging. And so I just don't want to miss these services. Brett, I want to respect the time. If you can slide forward. You know, we don't have all those subsidies that Karsten put up. So the economic considerations we have to make our projects or our budget work are right here. The monthly service fees, which your colleagues in town of Concord that live here pay. The entrance fee, Medicaid payments, don't get me started on Medicare and Medicaid, but it's getting hammered. And so here we are saying, look, we want to do more service at a time when Medicare and Medicaid is getting hammered. The percent refund on the contract for the entrance fee and obviously long-term care insurance. But we have a much smaller group of cards to play than Karsten does. I'll just pick, you can see these examples. These are actual redacted examples of people who have moved in here. I'm incredibly proud of it. I mean, I'm incredibly proud of this couple that moved in with no assets. They had $400 of assets on their application, 400. You know, we accepted them at $3,400 a month in total income. Their rent was probably $2,100 a month. We've had them here since 2019 in and out of the nursing home and have made a long-term home for them. You know, you can see the example of someone moving in with, you know, $3,200 a month of income, which really is sort of a Social Security type of an income. And the monthly rate was $1,800 a month. You can see a 50% refundable contract is something that we've used. We do accept Mass Health directly into the nursing home, you know, as part of this program. And so, you know, I can talk more at a different time with different, you know, examples, but we have these people right here in our building that have lived some for 5-10 years at least, but also using services all along. In most of those services, we don't even kind of call free care. We don't even necessarily account for, which we probably need to start doing. But it's part of what a CCRC does. You're not gonna say Mrs. Smith is in room 200, but the person in room 210, we're not doing emergency response for. We're not gonna visit her when she gets back from Emerson. We're not gonna send dinner up. We're not gonna help her get to her doctor's appointment. We just do all those things. And so that's just an overview. Do you have one more for us, Brett?
Can I just segue off of that, Chris, and I think we're done and then we can answer
Sure.
any questions.
Sure.
So I want to bring this back to the bylaw because we're here to talk to you about the bylaw. We've got a provision in the bylaw now that says that the planning board may require up to 10% of the independent living units or health services units as attainable units. Attainable is not a word we made up. This is an emerging view of housing. Montgomery County has an attainable unit report on the internet if you want to look at it. The Urban Land Institute, which is a prominent national organization, has a unit on attainability if you want to look at it. And we're targeting 70 to 140% of AMI households, whether they're one or two persons, as being the eligible audience for the attainable units. And the key is the slide that we just had in terms of the tools at our disposal. We can play with the entry fee. We can adjust the income limits that we would like otherwise to see in an incoming tenant. We can take a look at Medicaid payments at the end of tenancy, not necessarily just the beginning of tenancy. And there's also a potential for fooling around with the refund at the negotiating stage to try to make the unit affordable and still keep Newbury Court in business. So that's the definition of affordability that we'd like to use here rather than DHCD, EOHLC's standard regulatory agreement provisions with regard to shelter costs, annual monitoring of the rental tenants, things of that sort.
That's an important, thank you, Mark. That's an important concept. I'd advise you to lead with that at the planning board hearing, or have it where they'll probably give you 10 minutes for your presentation. But I'd say that what your version of affordability looks like, attainability, if that's what it is, I think it's important for the community to understand that, so that you so that because I think that much of the, as Chris indicated, much of the discussion will be around that, and those will be important things to bring up at the planning board's public hearing on April 9th. I think we'll all be there along with many others. If you can do additional, if you have additional sessions for the community to hear about the proposal, I think that would be helpful as well. And it's appreciate the opportunity to start this dialogue with the trust today, and appreciate your being here.
Can I ask the same question I asked of Karsten? Can we submit written questions and ask Chris and Mark to answer them?
Yes,
Because,
we
I
did.
mean, it's a great presentation, and, I know population over 80 and 90 is going up over 60, 70% the next 25 years.
Just on this call alone. So
Yeah. Right, yes. May I apply now? No.
Well, come on, you already told me you don't support me, Rich.
I didn't say I didn't support you. Anyhow, but I mean, not just for myself, but for others. This has been a good presentation. It does raise some questions. And I'm wondering if we could just maybe submit through you, Keith, questions and have you forward them to
Sure.
Chris and Mark.
that would be great, and love to get your slides for our record
Yes.
too, so we can have that as a resource. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thanks so much for your time and the presentation, and we'll look forward to continuing to stay in touch. I want to call upon, we have a group of folks with us who are exploring a group home for persons with special needs in the Concord community. A number of us have had a chance to meet with those folks on I know Elisa, who's on this call, along with Liz Rust and Elizabeth Hughes on town staff, have had a chance to meet with the group as well. And we have Mishi and Andy who are here from that group. And I'd welcome you to just introduce yourselves and just give us a quick overview of what you're looking for, and we're all happy to see how we can support your what you're trying to do in the community.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Andy Rickard. I am a housing development manager for Minuteman ARC in Concord, and which is a human services agency that supports individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities from really the whole life cycle, from birth at our shortly after birth at the early intervention, all the way to the end of life. So, and I appreciate the time to be here. I know it's been a long meeting already, so I will try to be very brief and be free to chime in as well. But the focus here is on individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The landscape for housing for those individuals is very difficult. A very small number of individuals are prioritized for housing by the state.
I'm having difficulty hearing you, Andy. I don't know if others are.
Yeah, it's, like he was talking into a barrel.
Let me see if I take those out.
There you go.
That's better.
That's better. Thank you.
Technology. Sorry about that. So as I said, we're focused on individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm from Minuteman ARC here in Concord. We have been here for 66 years. And parents came to us asking about housing for their loved ones. As many individuals are living at home because there's not another option. We're all familiar with the typical group home, and which is very, very expensive for the state to run. So those, it's very difficult to get into a group home. Right now, it's prioritized for those that are just not safe in their own home, whether because of their parents are aging, their caregivers are not able to take good care of them. those are the only individuals who are prioritized for housing who have an intellectual disability at this point. So there are also a lot of individuals who are capable of more independence than a group home, which provides 24/7 support. They're capable of more independence than that. So we've been working to develop a model that is financially sustainable and can provide that path to independence, that path from the family home to a cluster of independent units that are together supporting each other with guardrails, and support to an independent apartment, perhaps with a roommate. And that path is not there. It's not out there for these individuals. So and I was approached by several families in Concord, Mishi being one, to talk about their planning ahead because they recognize that there's not going to be an opportunity in a group home, and they want to see more for their loved ones, and they want them, they've grown up in Concord, they want to be able to stay in their community. So just quickly, we just wanted to create awareness of that as a need for housing. We're working on a model that we're very excited about. We'd welcome an opportunity to come back and talk about that in more detail, but really appreciate just the opportunity to create help to start creating awareness for this type of housing.
Thanks, Andy. Rich Feely,
Yeah,
your
very
hand is.
quickly, are you aware that the 2229 task force flagged a part of the that parcel which is right next to ARC for a possible group home? And so just going back to our first presentation, possibly if the town acquires that land, making some of that land available ought to be part of your package when you're thinking about putting it together.
Yeah, that would be tremendous because Minuteman Arc, we're not big developers, so we're going to need some help with this. And that's convenient to the services they're already receiving.
Yeah, no, that's why we flagged it as a possible project.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great news.
Thank you. Mishi, did you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Michi. I'm a mom of an adult child with Down syndrome. She's 20. She's gonna be 21 in a couple of months, and I'm representing all the other parents that can't be here tonight. But there's a lot of us, and we all have. Andy summed it up quite nicely. We all have concerns about. We're not going to be around forever. We're aging, and we need to have things in place for our kids. And yeah, I'd like her to stay in Concord. She loves it here. She's got her friends. She's got a job. She works at West Village Tavern. And a number of the other families, they have kids that are working in the community. And Concord Carlisle High School has a program called Pathways, which is for 18 to 22-year-olds, and they've got a new business work study kind of place that's going to go up over by Crosby's. That's it.
Very good. Thanks, Michi. Appreciate you being here. Thanks, Andy. Also, and any questions? Any other questions from the floor? I'm very appreciative of your coming here so that we can see you. You're on our radar screen as you see that there's we've got a lot that we're dealing with, and we want to be sure that we're thinking about you as well. So thanks for coming. I know I've already helped them set up a meeting with the party that we just we're talking to for the last half hour at Deaconess. So we're happy to help you explore all the opportunities that there are in Concord.
We so appreciate that. Thank you. We really do appreciate it. And as I said, if time is valuable to you, and that's why we tried to keep it brief. But if there's an opportunity to tell you about some of the things we've been working on, we'd be happy to do that as well in the future.
Very good. And for the future, when we get all the housing groups together, working on a date for a next roundtable, and that might be another opportunity for you to report back when you've got something, maybe something in particular for us to give feedback to back to you, and be happy to keep you on our radar screen. So.
Terrific.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right, our next, I'm gonna get, before I lose any more, I want to pick a time for the trust to meet next. And I'm gonna make the suggestion of Tuesday, April 1st at 5 p.m. And here's why. That we will be needing to, under the update on housing production plan things. The first item is Assabet River Bluff, and we are working on a land disposition agreement, an LDA, the town council's drafting for the trust, the CHDC, the Housing Authority, and Habitat for Humanity. And we would need an authorizing vote from each of our boards to enter into that LDA. The agreement, we'll get a revised draft next week, and I'm hoping that, I know the CHDC is planning to meet on early in the day on April 1st to take their authorizing votes for, so I'm hoping we might be able to get together that time if that works.
Are you thinking 5 o'clock, Keith?
Yeah, April 1st, 5 p.m.
Okay.
Would that work? Rich?
Right now, that'll work.
I
yeah.
can't do it, Keith. I'm out of the country, but I'm comfortable if you have a quorum. I mean, I'm comfortable with my colleagues making the decision. This is one I don't think I disagree with.
Okay, very good, thanks. And Mike is able to attend.
I can do it.
And so let's go with April 1st at 5 p.m. That's great, thank you. On the Assabet, and the rest is just quick updates for you to be aware of, that we are on Assabet. We're also trying to get a decision on the request for snow and ice removal for the access road, Rothermel Place. And that a next step is either or the Public Works Commission, which heard us but did not take a vote, or the Select Board if the matter needs to go back to them. So we'll stay in touch about how that happens. Megan is here with us and can perhaps just update us on MCI Concord and the land use matrix, which are two opportunities for us that we want to dive right into.
Sorry for these children here. I thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. I think I have pretty brief updates here this evening for MCI Concord. I don't recall where our last update was, but our last, I might have to shut off my camera if it's distracting. Sorry. I think we have contracted with a planning and economic feasibility organization or company called Agency Landscape and Planning. And so we are working with them. We're using the state earmark that we received in the last budget cycle, and they're under contract and they're getting going. And they have sent over a preliminary engagement plan that the advisory board hasn't had a chance to dive into yet, but they just sent it over. And of course, speaking with this group and the housing community is a major priority. I was at a meeting today where we were meeting with MassDOT and the Department of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance. And the DCAM folks were reiterated again that housing is a state priority for this site. It doesn't mean it has to be all housing. It doesn't mean there's only one type of housing that would be acceptable, but there will you know, the state is looking to have housing at this location. So I think that we'll have more to share soon about what outreach opportunities and community opportunities exist for how to engage with the consultant and the committee, but that is ongoing. Sorry. And the final piece is the land use matrix. My update is that the select board has approved a charge for I think it's either task force or committee. I think it's a task force to work on this. They will be having some communication coming out to you soon, because in the charge, I don't know if you've seen it, it's on the select board webpage. It does call out a member of this body as someone that would like to have participate in this group. And so I believe there'll be correspondence that's coming out shortly to ask you all to nominate a member to participate. We had a lot of the players that are working on this effort internally are also very tied up in the 250th celebration right now. So we are working on it internally, but like, again, we're a little bit tied up in the next couple of weeks, and we look forward to focusing even more after the 250th.
Very good. Thanks, Megan. Both of those are on our radar screen, and especially after hearing the presentation from Karsten at MHP. I found that to be a mind-opening experience about how we approach how our funds go. We tend to be the place that people come to for all of their money, as opposed to us having our money be a leverage for something that is much bigger. And so I think both MCI and the land use matrix offer maybe opportunities for that, for our money to go further. And so that's great. Thank you. Elisa Sandoval is here with us too. So I'll just thank you for being here, and happy to hear any updates you have on the subsidized housing inventory, or really anything at all. You're right in the middle.
Great. Thanks so much for having me here. So I'll just give a couple updates. So in terms of the affordable housing, the SHI, so just an update overview, Concord has 919 SHI units. That is 12.8% of SHI as affordable units, which is over the required 10%. In the pipeline are two from Old Marlborough Road. I believe those are from by the Concord Housing Development Corps, and they have a building permit, so they are undertaking those renovations. So that would add to the SHI, and there could be an additional 237 units from the Thoreau 40B if that is approved. Although there is the Novo 40B, that's 201 units that may come off of the SHI because that developer has not pulled a building permit. So in order for it to be eligible, they have to pull a building permit within a year, and they haven't done that as of yet. So, but if the, Thoreau 40B is approved, then that would sort of offset that 40B.
Right.
The ZBA has a continued hearing on the Thoreau 40B on April 3rd. So I just wanted to kind of report that. And it looks like there's a question on this, so.
I'll just, Rich, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, I've talked to the developer directly, and he said, no, we cannot pull it by April 15th. He said, we're still seriously, going, we want to go forward. We hope to get in the ground. But he said, uncertainties as to the economy and construction prices and financing, he said, they haven't put the package together. So, I still think we'll get it, but, the package isn't there yet.
That's good to know.
Right, and so what that means is that when the 201 units fall off the subsidized housing inventory, we land at 10.001 percent, which is still above 10%, if barely. And that is the reason why we're trying to get those two rental units at Assabet River Bluff added to the SHI ASAP. Because it's, although we're also, I know that Theo and the ZBA are mindful of, or trying to get their decision on the thorough 40B filed with the town clerk by that April 16th deadline, in which case 201 would fall off, but 237 would fall on, would go on, even if, and then that too would be only for a year until they pull their building permit. So certainly something that we all have to keep our eye on, and appreciate the work that everyone's doing to get that done.
Yeah, and just one other update
please.
too on Assabet River Bluff project. I did just kind of look at the building permit status of that project, and it permits have been issued to Habitat Humanity for the development at 2636 and 48 Rothermel Place. So that is the 3 new proposed dwelling units. The building commissioner, I checked in with him. He doesn't believe any site work has commenced yet, but they do have the have permits in place right now. So.
Right, and I saw, it looked like there was the wetlands netting or something that was on the site. And that, by the way, that's being funded with there was $500,000 in community preservation funds that the CHDC had. There was the $1 million to acquire it, then another $500,000 to do some site work. So that's commencing even before the closing, which would transfer some of the property from the CHDC to the Housing Authority and it's a very complicated project with lots of moving parts. So thanks very much,
Sure, no
Lisa, for
problem.
all you're doing for us. Last, or getting near the end, I just wanted to note that all the state legislation for funding the trust, they all have bill numbers now, not just docket numbers, but bill numbers, and all of those bills have been referred to the Joint Committee on Revenue, which this year is chaired by the Senate Chair is Jamie Eldridge of Acton, who many of us know, and who is a supporter of the transfer fee, even though I don't think any of the communities in his district have it. But actually, Jamie is one of the co-sponsors of LOHA's bill for a statewide local option transfer fee, as far as I can see. So there will be a hearing, I'm sure, scheduled at some point. And no matter where Rich Veely is when that happens, he'll let us know about it, so that we'll all, with our organizer on the LOHA Coalition, and any news from that group, Rich?
No, except Senator Sear now has a bill in the mix as well, which is somewhat different from the statewide bill and obviously different from our HRPs. We're in the organizing phase at this point, and I think they'll start trying to reach out to the relevant committee chairs in the next couple of weeks.
Very good. Thanks very much. Lastly, and I think something else that we'll be able to do on an April 1st meeting is prepare for the public hearings that will take place on annual town meeting articles. First public hearing. So if we're meeting on April 1st, that would give us an opportunity to spend some time looking at the zoning articles that will be heard by the planning board on April 9th. There's a select board hearing on the 14th, finance committee on April 15th, which is when they'll be hearing our request for community preservation funding for next year. So we'll have a chance to look at those at our April 1st meeting. Any public comment? Stefan?
In terms of timing of approvals, you were talking about April 1st. The Housing Authority has their board meeting on Thursday, April 3rd. Will that present a problem if we don't approve formally
No, that works.
2 days after?
That works for, yeah, that first week of April would work.
Okay.
Our target is the first week of April to get votes to sign the land disposition agreement for Assabet River Bluff. So that would work well. Thanks.
And CHA is standing by for earlier meeting if they need it.
Oh, very good. Okay. All right. So
Keith, can I just
our
say
next,
one other quick
yes,
thought before I
Stefan.
forget it?
Yes.
Read the proposal for housing for people with disabilities. If their sources of income are primarily Social Security disability, I would imagine that would qualify them, and therefore perhaps the units to be on the SHI somehow. We should probably keep that in mind too.
Yeah, that's a good point. If it does meet those criterias that there are, we have DDS group homes that we do get to count on the inventory. That's right.
Thank you.
Very good. So our next meeting is April 1st at 5 p.m. Ready for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Rich, second by Mike.
And
Roll call.
Keith, you'll send the slides?
Yes, soon as, yeah, I'll follow up for the slides and send them out. Yeah.
Yeah, both sets, please, Keith.
Yes, both sets. Yeah,
set,
from
please.
both of our speakers. Yeah.
But I thought Karsten was terrific. I wish I'd seen that about 6 years ago when I first got involved with affordable housing.
Me too. Yeah,
We saw a lot of that when we were dealing with the Junction Village
With Grantham, yep.
project, especially the tax credits and
Yeah.
then the blow of the increase.
Yeah, in fact, and that would Junction Village was the last time I think any affordable housing project was looked through that lens here. And it's but that's where that's where the money is. You just have to have a developer that you're willing to have a long-term relationship with. So very good. All right. So on the motion to adjourn, Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Linda?
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. Megan?
Hi.
And Keith, aye. So we are adjourned at 6:53 p.m. Thank you
Feel
all
better, Mike.
very
Thanks,
much.
Keith.
Take care.
Bye,
Thank you
everybody.
all.